Okay, so good holy everyone. My name is Mary Angelique Garciano and we're going to talk about brain-based education. Okay. What is brain-based education? Brain-based learning refers to teaching methods, lesson designs, and school programs that are based on the latest scientific research about how the brain learns, including such factors as cognitive development, how students learn differently as they age, grow, and mature socially, emotionally, and cognitively. Brain-based learning is motivated by the general belief that learning can be accelerated and improved if educators base how and what they teach on the science of learning rather than on past educational practices, established conventions, or assumptions about the learning process. For example, it was commonly believed that intelligence is a fixed characteristics that remain largely unchanged throughout a person's life. However, recent discoveries in cognitive science have revealed that the human brain physically changes when it learns, and that after practicing certain skills, it becomes increasingly easier to continue learning and improving those skills. This finding that learning effectively improves brain functioning, resiliency, and working intelligence has potentially far reaching implications for how schools can design their academic programs and how teachers could structure educational experiences in the classroom. So, for the history of brain based education, um, very early, very early on, scientists identified the left hemisphere of the brain as the primary biological focus for language and analytical thought. In 1861, Pierre Paul Broca found evidence to link speech to a specific brain site. On the other hand, Carl Wernicke in 1874 found additional evidence linking language to left hemisphere of the brain. In 1892, Jules Dejerin found that reading and writing deficits resulted from damage to the left hemisphere. These findings were extrapolated to mean that specific mental functions had precise locations in the brain. The localization theory, which dominated neuroscience research in the first half of the 20th century. Above all of the names that were mentioned a while ago, Vygotsky, on the other hand, strayed somewhat from this dominant theory by um, by proposing that functions such as language, although possibly having a primary focus in the left hemisphere, was more likely to involve neural process distributed throughout the brain. He also proposed that neurological structures associated with mental functions were influenced and modified by the sociocultural environment. In the mid 20th century, Sperry and his colleagues confirmed the hemisphere dominates language and analytical thought, provided a breakdown of psychological functions according to hemisphere, and shows that both hemisphere are involved, the right and the left hemisphere. Both of them are involved in complex thinking. On the other hand, in 1967, Eric Lenneberg observed that loss of speech due to disorders in a language function became permanent after puberty. This suggested to Lineberg that at puberty, the brain lost its ability to transfer language functions from the left hemisphere to the right hemisphere of the brain. And from there, he inferred that the critical period for language acquisition is before adolescence. In 1990, the neurobiologist Paul MacLean developed the triune brain theory, stating that we have three brains, each representing a separate evolutionary stratum and function, and controlling our emotions, thoughts, and behaviors. According to this theory, survival learning would be located in the lower brain, emotions in the midbrain, and higher order thinking would take place in the upper brain. In the last 3 decades, neuroscientists have obtained information on how the brain works from autopsies, experiments, and different types of scans like MRIs, EEGs, PET and CAT. For example, PET brain scans provide images of mental activities such as language, or show how the neocortex is involved in producing various physiological functions and psychomotor movements, based on Arrowsmith and Dennessy. So, results of neuroscientific research are interpreted as having implications for improving teaching practices. So next slide, we're going to talk about the parts of the brain that activates learning. So as you can observe in our diagram below, the figure on the left side, we have the basic structure of the brain. We have the cranium, the cortex, the cerebellum, the dura, spinal cord, brainstem, and basal ganglia. On the other hand, the parts of the brain that is responsible and activates the learning, we have the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, the temporal lobe, and the frontal lobe. Those are the lobes of the human brain. So we are going first to talk about the cerebrum. It is the largest part of the brain and is composed of right and left hemispheres. So it performs higher functions like interpreting touch, vision, and hearing, as well as speech, reasoning, emotions, learning, and fine control of movement. Let's get back. Cerebellum, on the other hand, is located under the cerebrum. Its function is to coordinate muscle movements, maintain posture, and balance. Brainstem, on the other hand, acts as a relay center connecting the cerebrum and cerebellum to the spinal cord. It performs many automatic functions such as breathing, heart rate, body temperature, wake and sleep cycles, the digestion, sneezing, coughing, vomiting, and swallowing. So we're going also to talk about the left and the right brain. So the cerebrum, is divided into two halves, the right and the left hemisphere. A while ago, we just talked about the history of the brain-based education on how many known people studied about the left hemisphere of the human brain. So the left and the right hemisphere of the brain are joined by a bundle of fibers called the corpus callosum that transmit messages from one side to the other. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. So the left brain controls the right side the left hemisphere controls the right side of the body, and the right hemisphere control the left side of the body. Not all functions of the hemispheres are shared. In general, the left hemisphere controls speech, comprehension, arithmetic, and writing. The right hemisphere controls, on the other hand, controls the creativity, spatial ability, artistic, and musical skills. The left hemisphere is dominant in hand use and language in about 92% of people. So we are going to talk about the lobes of the brain. So we have the frontal lobe, the parietal lobe, the occipital lobe, and temporal lobe. Lobe. So the cerebral hemispheres have distinct features which divided the brain into lobes. Each lobe may be divided once again into areas that serve very specific functions. It's important to understand that each lobe of the brain does not function alone. There are very complex relationships between the lobes of the brain and between the right and the left hemisphere. So the frontal lobe is responsible for the personality, behavior, emotions, judgment, planning, problem solving. Also the speech, speaking, and writing by Broca's area, subbroca's area. Um, Body movement or the motor script, intelligence, concentration, and self-awareness. So parietal lobe, on the other hand, is responsible for interpreting language and words, sense of touch, pain, and temperature. So it is located on the sensory strip. Interprets signals from vision, hearing, motor, sensory, and memory. Spatial parietal lobe is also responsible for spatial and visual perception. So let's observe the diagram on where are those four lobes located on the hemispheres of the brain. So we also have the occipital lobe, which interprets the vision. So the color, the light, and movement. Temporal lobe, on the other hand, is responsible for understanding language, specifically on the Wernicke's area. Also, temporal lobe is responsible for memory, hearing, and sequencing and organization.
Good holy everyone, I'm Charlotte Choice Meliendez, and let's continue the discussion. Here are the 12 principles of brain-based learning. The first one, the brain is a complex adaptive system, or in other words, it is a parallel process. Because our brain is composes of different thoughts, ideas, and it deals with the different and interact with the different kinds of information. And the brain is a social brain because, as what the reporter said a while ago, it has a different parts and has a specialized functions that enable to function. Kailangan kumonekta siya sa different channels, which is dadaan siya sa neurons, wherein our brain is composed of a billions of neurons for it to functions the entire body. The search for meaning is in it. We have this kind of eagerness sometime na pag hindi natin na-find yung answer is meron talaga tayong hunger in terms when it comes to learners. Kailangan talaga masagot yung questions sa mind natin. And it is important because it will enhances the critical thinking skills of the learners. The search for meaning occurs through patterning. So ito yung tinatawag nating organizations of the mind. Kumbaga para siyang scientific method wherein it follows step-by-step process for it to organize. Emotions are critical to patterning. So it is related. Importante ang role ni emotions natin dito when it comes to thinking kasi the emotions, it is the mode for us. Ito yung nagsiset ng mode natin na nagmo-motivate sa atin na mag-learn and create. Kumbaga pag wala tayong gana matuto because of our emotions na na-feel natin and we could express it, talagang hindi talaga magpa-function yung mind natin. So, it is really connected. Every brain simultaneously perceives and creates parts and wholes. So, ito, as a teacher, as an educator, kailangan yung students natin is yung both left and right hemisphere is nagpa-function for it to develop the critical thinking skills of the learners. Learnings involves both focused attention and peripheral attention. And learning always involves conscious and unconscious processes. Ito yung tinatawag nating active processing wherein the learners already in charge of what they've learned, not just by that, but also what they've experienced so that they could able to learn. We have at least two ways of organizing memory. Ito yung spatial memory na hinati sa dalawa, yung short term at saka long term. Kumbaga, obviously, they have this difference na yung short term, ito yung temporary stored memory na nakakalimutan natin na hindi na natin ma-recall. And then yung long term naman is ito yung pangmatagalan nating memory na nare-recall natin at saka nare-remember natin as we think. And then learning is developmental. Yes, learning is a continuous process but dynamic. So it is developmental. Kasi for example, when we are kindergarten before, during that time is we have this topic na about lang sa vowels, the sounds of vowels, yung apple, ball, yung mga ganun lang. But later on, nagde-develop yung learnings natin is nag-a-upgrade, nagkaroon na ng mga complicated subjects, and now, college na tayo, we are dealing already and we're talking now about the brain-based learning. And complex learning is enhanced by challenge and inhibited by threat. So, para naman ma-enhance yung learnings, kailangan as a teacher, gumawa tayo ng activities na challenging para naman hindi ma-bored yung students. Like for example na mas stretch din yung mind nila, yung puzzle, or they could able to think more para ma-engage sila sa discussion at saka sa activities. And then the last one, every brain is uniquely organized. So each of us has differences. Kumbaga, although we have this kind of similarities in common, but in fact, we have this kind of differences when it comes to the formation of our brain and its structure and its functions. Iba-iba tayo ng learning strategies at iba-iba din tayo ng learning styles at saka the way we think in our perspective and even our opinions and a mindset. Kaya, every brain is uniquely organized. Kagaya na lang sa brain ni Albert Einstein. So, yung brain niya is iba yung formation at saka iba yung structure compared to the other brains of human. Here are the strategies of brain-based learning that we could able to apply. First, set a positive tone from the beginning. So, sa simula pa lang, bago ka mag-discuss or you're just presenting your objectives, kailangan you have this kind of cheerful expression or you are happy na para pag makita ka ng student mo is talagang you have this kind of positive tone. And then, for example, you just present the icebreaker or something na exciting na games or activities for your motivation para makuha mo yung attention nila and they will going to participate and listen to your entire lesson. The second one is establish turn and talk time. So, in the discussion, when you discuss, so kailangan hindi lang dapat yung teacher yung nagsasalita all the time. And then, kailangan natin, we give time for the learners, for them to speak and then share their knowledge and what they have learned or they have their prior knowledge in the classroom para magkaroon tayo ng interaction at saka para din maging effective yung discussion. And then the third one is incorporate visual elements. So, in the classroom settings, we have this kind of different learners, diversity kumbaga. Merong iba't ibang learners, merong visual, linguistic, so on and so forth. So, merong learners na kapag nakita nila yung visual aids na puno lang ng text, yung walang pictures, or naka-paragraph talaga, all text lang talaga, so nawawalan sila ng gana na makinig because of that. So, merong mga instances na ganyan. So, kailangan, when you present a visual aids, you use some technologies because we're dealing at 21st century na learners. And then, we could able to use na creativity, like animation or something na makukuha natin yung attention ng learners. Could also use another, yung flat screen TV or even just a simple visual aids. Basta, talagang, kaya-aya sa matatignan. And then the fourth one, break learnings into chunks. So, ito yung connected to the visual aids presentation na ng teacher na kailangan is from text is hindi mo dapat ilagay lahat. Kumbaga, paunti-unti lang yung ilagay natin. Like for example, you have this topic brain. So, lagay mo yung brain doon lagyan mo ng one sentence na definition, and then pwede mo nang dagdagan ng pictures para naman hindi malito yung students natin. Para naman makikinig talaga sila sa lessons mo. Hindi na ilagay mo lahat yung definition ng brain mo na at nalilito na yung bata. Kailangan break the learnings into chunks. Hatiin natin para hindi hassle sa part ng learners. And then the last one, get moving. So, hindi lang dapat kailangan na yung activities natin is involve lang yung mind natin, we're just thinking. No, kailangan para magkaroon ng interactive participation yung student, kailangan din nagmo-move sila. Kailangan natin magkaroon ng assessment na, like for example, it integrates the collaboration at saka creativity of the student. Pwede rin tayong magkaroon ng assessment like role-playing, at saka other na collaborative works like presentation or color, something like that na may enhance yung cognitive thinking skill, not just on the thinking skills but also on the physical aspect of the learners. So that's all. Thank you for listening and I hope you learned something today. God bless and good holy once again.